Now I would like to move on to the second report. Okay, and she's going to speak about a different influence of sex and species.
Well, first of all, I would like to say a few words about what we call a social network. And I have a video here, but for some reason it's not working. Well, we'll try without it. Well, due to the fact that in the recent years we have seen the rise of social networks online, we all understand what social network is. But in the community of animals, social networks also exist, or something similar to it. A number of individuals or agents that are connected by social ties. So in a way, these social networks are a description of a social structure of a specific community. The social structure can be very different, and therefore the social networks can be of different types. And there are different ways of how to analyze and describe such social ties. I'm going to use the most simple method, the so-called centrality. Centrality means that animals that are color-coded have different centrality measures, and I'm going to explain that in a few moments. The most simple way to show centrality is the number of social links of a specific individual. So, for example, this person in the network. Can you see my cursor here on the screen? Yes, we can see it. So, for example, this particular animal has 2 connections, others have 2 connections, and therefore they are color-coded in purple. Then eigenvector centrality is a different measure. It depends on the number of ties, but also the intensity of them. Here are 2, but there are also 2 here, but they're all color-coded in a different thing because they have higher influence or higher hierarchy, because they have 2 connections to the central individuals, whereas this particular animal has peripheral connections. So this eigenvector centrality means that it's good to have connections with those who have more connections. This is a different measure, which is called betweenness. It is high in those individuals that have the maximum number of connections leading them to the central individual. And the final measure, the so-called cut points. These are not so much centrality measures. It's not even a numerical measure. It's something that is either there or not. And a cut point means that an individual is a cut point, that if you take away this particular animal, then there will be several clusters. So this is an animal that actually brings together different elements of a social network. So what is it that we tried to establish in this particular effort? How the role in the social network differs among the age and sex classes. What are the centrality measures for different age and sex classes? Well, in order to find this out, we used the old method of photo identification. We went into sea, we took pictures of all the killer whales that we sighted, and then, based on the photographs, especially when the photographs are of good quality, we could identify the animals. And then, how did we determine the social connections of a particular individual? Killer whales spend most of their time underwater, so it was very difficult to watch them underwater. So how in the studies of cetaceans, it is considered that connections are the closeness of or interaction of 2 individuals. So if we find a specific group of animals together, we call them a spatial group. We believe that during this particular encounter they are associated. If, however, we saw 2 individual whales that were not keeping in a group, that means that they are not associated. So this data is gathered during a lot of days and even years, and then based on the data we make a calculation of the so-called simple ratio index, the association indexes. Simple ratio index is one of the simplest ways to calculate this association index. The number of all the encounters while associated with a group divided by the number of times where they could have been observed associating. With one animal, with two animals, or the encounters when they were present without any association, etc. So this index works very well in a situation where we are sure that we have identified all the animals. If we're not sure in that, then we can use another index where the number of sightings of one animal without the other has less weight, because we cannot be sure that if we haven't seen an animal, it was not really there. Because in the first case scenario we can be sure, then it's the simple ratio index. For example, in the Aleutian Islands, the difficulty is the weather, the fact that you cannot always see the killer whales, so we calculate the association index between each pair of animals, and we build a social network. This is the social network of the Commander Islands killer whales from observations starting 2008. As you can see, there's a huge cluster in the center and several smaller clusters around it. This does not mean that these components are not connected. It is highly likely that we have not been able to establish this connection, and some of the killer whales were not registered during the project. We have also identified a number of age-sex categories. Adult males, we could see their fluke. Then, based on the observations, we could identify a number of adult females, and also sometimes they had small pups with them, and sometimes we could see juveniles that did not yet have the dorsal fin grow. Then we could put them in the category of females, and then of course the juveniles. They are separate, they are independent, but you can see that they're smaller and their markings on the skin were not as pronounced. Some of the animals could not be put into any group. We could not identify the animals. They could be adult females or juveniles, and therefore we put them into the others category. Olga, could you please a little bit slower? I will try to. So here you can see the degree of centrality, and on this picture, the bigger the spot is, the bigger is the degree of centrality. So according to our calculations, if you divide this degree of centrality by group, you will see that juveniles have the biggest degree of centrality. The highest degree of centrality, over 15, were mostly juveniles. It turned out that juveniles have this highest degree of centrality among other categories. The second measure that we had, Eigenvector Centrality, you can see that mostly in the central cluster, which is quite logical if you think about it. And you can see that the animals with the highest eigenvector centrality over 0.05 are juveniles mostly. And finally, the betweenness is way lower, because this is a homogenic social network. The picture is very different. Among the animals with the highest betweenness factor were males. And the cut points were identified here on this chart. It's a very interesting thing. Females and juveniles are not found among the cut point animals. These are mostly males and others. It's 10 minutes. Yes, and I'm finishing now. I have my final slide here. There could be many different conclusions, and I really wanted to say what it means, what our results can bring about for our knowledge of killer whales. So it turned out that juveniles are the most socially active group. They have more associations and social contacts. They have more associations with other animals who also have a lot of social associations. And it turns out that possibly juveniles in killer whales, but also in other species, including humans, are more sociable in general. They are curious, they play together, and in killer whales you can sometimes see that when a few families get together, juveniles start playing together. So in such situations we take pictures and can reveal such social contacts and associations. With males, the situation is completely different. They have different tasks. Males are not really very social. When there's a family of killer whales passing by, you can see that the males keep a little distance from the rest of the family. It seems that all the hustle and bustle annoys them. But when huge aggregations of many families are brought together, they have a very important task. They need to find a receptive female. So for a while, for an hour, 2 or 3, they may leave their own family and go over to a different group, trying to find a receptive female. And the further away the family is, the less chance there is for close relation. So adult males are the cut out points because they keep their distance. They sometimes find themselves associating with the small clusters of less known animals. An interesting point is that adult females do not really show higher degrees of social associations or social centrality, because the families are actually built around females. So it is a strange conclusion. Usually family is a female with her children and grandchildren. So even though they are the central part of every family, in terms of the social network, they have less centrality than other animals. So it's a very interesting and unusual conclusion. Well, this is where I wanted to stop. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. Thank you, Olga. As always, the presentation was highly interesting. And we have just a few moments for questions. What is the minimal distance to determine associations? What is the maximum distance? Well, in our analysis, we believe that a group is animals that do not keep the distance of more than 4 bodies length. So maybe 24, 25 meters altogether. So that means it's a group that travels together. In different articles, you can find different measures, sometimes 25, sometimes more, but usually this means that these are the animals that are associated with each other. Thank you very much. And I have another question. Social connections between juveniles. You said that they are highly sociable animals. Have you analyzed, are these connections to other juveniles? Is because they are more active and they have these games between juveniles, or these are just social connections to other animals, other age-sex groups? We never really had this analysis of which age sex groups they associate mostly? This is a very interesting question, actually. I will try to look into it. But right now we don't have this data. We have not analyzed it from this point of view. But the index of centrality shows that they have a lot of connections to other animals that have a lot of connections. Thank you very much. This could be really interesting, because I think it could be a great answer if we could see that juveniles mostly get associated with each other. Because if we look into the traditions and the upbringing of animals of the same age, this could be an interesting point to make. And my final question, for which other cetaceans have you made similar research, or such research is available? Well, in terms of social networks, there are a lot of publications on killer whales of different populations. I know that humpback whales have been studied from that point of view, but it's very difficult to do the research with humpbacks. So yes, we're finishing now. I apologize. Thank you very much. I really have to hurry.